You might know that some zodiac signs are male and others female, but you might not know why. And you might not even know which ones are which, and you probably don't realize that the zodiac does not conform to a typical gender binary paradigm. It actually expresses a beautifully gradient gender spectrum. I believe the classical zodiac of astrology is one of the greatest works of art humanity has yet to conceive. Its 12-fold equal dimensions, its rulership by the 7 planets, its stratification of gender binaries, and its patterns of elemental triplicities and modal quadruplicities, each one is so balanced and symmetrical, and each one interacts with the others so gracefully, to weave an incredibly rich symbolic framework that reflects the depth and complexity of life itself. So far in this series, we've explored 3 things, this being the 4th episode. In the first episode, we explored the concept itself that astrology is beautiful and artistic. In the second episode, we explored the romantic, serendipitous, flawless simplicity that creates the 12 symmetrical zodiac divisions. And in the third episode, we described the simple symmetrical clarity that determines which planets take positions of which zodiac divisions. Now let's explore the hows and the whys behind the zodiac's representation of gender. So here are the 12 divisions of the zodiac. In the previous episode, we discussed why the sun and moon take possession of the 5th and 4th divisions, Leo and Cancer. And since the sun and moon are archetypically male and female, it's easy to digest the idea that these 2 divisions are respectively male and female. And it's simple enough to just repeat this pattern around the whole zodiac and get an accurate description of which signs are male and which are female. But this depiction of masculinity and femininity in the zodiac is neither particularly useful, nor is it the actual reason why the signs are male and female. Here's the true reason. The basic masculinity or femininity of a sign is a side effect of which of the 4 elements constitutes that sign. Here you can see which elements constitute which zodiac divisions. In the next episode, I'll explain why the elements are arrayed in this particular pattern. But for now, let's just accept that that's where they are. As you can see, some of them are fire, some are water, some are earth, and some are air. Fire is a very masculine element. Water is very feminine. Air is somewhat masculine, and earth is somewhat feminine. So when we lay it out like this, now we begin to see a clearer, more truly useful picture of a gender spectrum portrayed by the zodiac. But if you look closely at this, it makes it look like Scorpio and Cancer are both equally feminine. And I'm sure you're aware that the femininity of Scorpio is quite different from the femininity of Cancer. And in fact, none of the 2 signs are really much alike at all. So what's the reason for this? Well, the reason is that the elemental gender, which is what you see here, interacts with 2 other gender factors. Modality, which is also known as quadruplicity, and the planetary rulers. The 3 modes, cardinal, fixed, and dual, have an inherent, if subtle, gender dynamic to them. Cardinal is impatient and bold, which is a masculine quality. And this augments the maleness of Aries and Libra, but offsets the femininity of Cancer and Capricorn. The fixed mode is patient and enduring, which is a feminine quality. So this augments the femininity of Taurus and Scorpio, but it offsets the maleness of Leo and Aquarius. And the third mode, the dual mode, tries to balance both of the above qualities, and so it's of a neutral nature. So for now, we can say that this doesn't affect the gender of the signs, even though it's not exactly true that it doesn't affect the gender of the signs, but we'll talk more about that later. So what we have right now is a pretty good depiction that conveys the intensity of the gender in each sign, but this is before adding any effect from the third gender factor, which is the planetary ruler. The first thing that we notice when we consider the planetary rulers is that every starry planet owns both a male and a female sign. And this is another very beautiful and telling thing about how sophisticated the zodiac actually is when it describes gender. The gender of a sign's ruler certainly affects the gender dynamic of the sign. Venus and Moon are very feminine. So this will augment the femininity of the signs that they own and offset the masculinity of the signs they own. So it augments Cancer and Taurus, but offsets Libra. Mars and the Sun are very masculine. So this will augment the masculinity of the signs they own and offset the femininity. So that means it's going to augment the masculinity of Aries and Leo, but offset the femininity of Scorpio. Jupiter is also somewhat masculine, and that's going to augment the gender dynamic of its masculine sign, which is Sagittarius, but offset the femininity of its female sign, which is Pisces. And finally, we have Mercury and Saturn, which are gender fluid or gender irrelevant. So for the time being, we can again say that this won't affect the gender, but we'll talk more about this later. So now we're getting a pretty fully developed picture of the gender spectrum, actually, that the 12 zodiac signs describe. But let's try to clarify it still further, first with numbers and then with words. The reason why I like to use numbers for things is because numbers are very unambiguous and precise, so you can get a more precise explanation of things with numbers. Although there are things that numbers can't do, like have nuance and so forth, which words are useful for. So that's why we want to do both. But let's start with numbers. What we'll do is we'll use a scale from 0 to 2, where 0 is neutral, 1 is mild, and 2 is extreme. And numbers above 0 are expressing masculinity, and numbers below 0 are expressing femininity. So that's our basic scale. What we'll do with this system is we will score each of the 3 factors involved in creating the gender dynamic for each of the 12 signs. First, we'll do the elements. Fire is extremely masculine, so we'll give 2 points to each fire sign. Water is extremely feminine, so we'll give -2 points to each water sign. Air and earth are moderately male and female, so we'll give plus or minus 1 point to each of those signs. Next, we'll score the modes. We'll give 1 point to the cardinal signs, and we'll give a -1 to each of the fixed signs, and we won't do anything to the dual signs. And then finally, we'll score the rulers. So Mars and the Sun are the most male, so the signs that they rule will get +2. Venus and the Moon are the most female, so the signs they rule will get -2. Jupiter signs will get a +1, and Saturn and Mercury signs won't get anything. Then what we can do simply is sum up the values for each sign, and these sums describe very precisely and accurately the actual place of each sign on the gender spectrum. Then we can visualize these numbers on a graph, or we can put it onto a zodiac wheel using opacity to express the intensity of the gender. What we see is that we have 2 signs which are furthest out on the gender spectrum, Aries and Taurus. Aries being 100% masculine, the most extreme of any sign, and Taurus, the most extreme feminine sign, which is still 80% feminine. Then, a bit closer to the center, but still quite clearly on one side or the other, we have Leo, Cancer, and Sagittarius. These are 60% into their side of the spectrum. And then we have the signs that are very close to the center of the gender spectrum. These are only 20% away from neutrality. We have Mercury's Gemini and Virgo, and we have Scorpio and Pisces. This leaves us finally with the absolutely neutral, most gender irrelevant signs of all, Saturn signs, Capricorn and Aquarius. Now that this information is up here on the screen, I want to make sure that you don't have 2 misconceptions that I could foresee people easily getting. Here's the first misconception. The first misconception would sound something like this if it were in your head. Well, look, we got Aries and Taurus, and Cancer and Leo and Sagittarius that have definitely clear genders. The rest of them are kind of meh. They must be pretty boring. This is the first misconception that I want to address. The idea that being near the middle of the gender spectrum is kind of meh. Actually, it's quite different. Being near the center of the gender spectrum is absolutely not synonymous with being gender boring or unsexed. These signs that are near the middle, actually, they are extremely interesting in sexual ways and in any kind of gender relevant way, because they're very surprising. Actually, they're very full of surprises, and they don't behave in stereotypical ways. They are unique. So what I want to make clear is that all of the zodiac signs have potential to be very interesting in discussions that relate to gender and sexuality. And the second misconception that I want to talk about would sound something like this. Hey, look, Scorpio and Virgo, for example, have the same score. So I guess they're pretty much the same type of gender thing? No, that is definitely a misconception. Nothing could actually be further from the truth than the conception that, well, Virgo and Scorpio are kind of more or less the same in terms of gender dynamics. No, Virgo actually truly is a mildly gendered sign, and Scorpio really is actually the most dramatically gendered sign. So then how come it looks like this? How come it looks like they're scored equally? So because of this problem in the depiction, we need to look at the numbers from a different angle. We want to talk about not just the sum that they arrive to, but the way that they arrive at the sum. This is how Scorpio arrives at its -1 score. And this is how Virgo does. They both arrive at a mild score, but they both do it in very different ways. So Scorpio arrives at a mild score by having extremes on both sides of the spectrum that cancel each other out. Whereas Virgo arrives at a mild score because it's actually just got very mild scores consistently. So although at first it seemed like the math betrayed us, actually the math is making it very clear, and we can use math to illustrate this very clearly. So what we would do is we would look for the maximum and the minimum values in any sign's scoring factors, and then we would measure how far apart they are, and that will tell us how much drama or complexity is involved in how the sign arrived at its score. So I've done that, and here's the data displayed as a graph. And then we can also apply this data to the zodiac wheel by utilizing the striped pattern. The more clearly you see the striped pattern, the more dramatic its scoring was. And so in other words, the more complex the sign is in terms of how it works with gender. So if we take a look at this, the one thing we'll notice is that Mercury signs, which are Gemini and Virgo, you can't see any stripes at all. And on the other hand, the stripes are the most visible in Libra and Scorpio, and this again is very accurate because these are the signs that have the most complex gender dynamics. But as we come to this point, we are kind of coming to the wall at the end of the yard in which mathematics reigns supreme. We're kind of coming to the end of the usefulness of numbers, and we're knocking on a door where we need to start using words. So let's do that. In order to pick out what words to use to effectively describe the variations in the gender of the zodiac signs, we need a motif, and the correct motif to use has to do with age. So what we'll do is we'll add another layer of clarity to this discussion by scoping the gender of the sign in the context of the age of its ruling planet. So as you know, a young boy is not the same as a middle-aged boy or an old boy, nor is a young girl the same as a middle-aged girl as an old woman, right? First, let's consider the most clear-cut signs. We've got Aries and Taurus. Those are very clear-cut male and female signs. And let's talk about how they differ from the next most clear-cut signs, which are Leo and Cancer. The difference is really that the rulers of Aries and Taurus have a different age bracket than the rulers of Cancer and Leo. The rulers of Aries and Taurus are Mars and Venus, and these planets signify young adulthood. Adulthood, but young adulthood, newly adulted people. We can now have a clue about how to accurately describe the difference in the gender here. When we're talking about Aries and Taurus, we're talking about gender, whether it's extremely male or female. We're talking about gender that has a very newly sprouted feeling to it, like a youthful adult nature. That's the quality of the masculinity and femininity that's in Aries and Taurus. And this contrasts with Leo and Cancer, where the rulers are more experienced. These two signs are more interested in achieving stability. They're more interested in seeing stability and reliability in the things that you would use gender for and that gender is involved with. Now that we have this paradigm here of age, we can stick Jupiter signs into it, because Jupiter fits in here fairly cleanly. Jupiter signifies people that are just a bit older than the people signified by the sun and moon. So that means that the gender dynamic of Jupiter's signs, Sagittarius and Pisces, are actually like fully matured. And so these signs tend to apply the assets of gender, not to the things that Aries and Taurus pursue, but towards the things that an older type of person is interested in, which is like refining their experience. So Pisces and Sagittarius, they apply the assets of gender mostly to furthering their knowledge and understanding of their partners and of the world that they interact with. Next up, let's look at the most gender-neutral signs: Mercury's Gemini and Virgo, and Saturn's Capricorn and Aquarius. Again, the difference here between these two sets is a difference in the age bracket of their rulers. Mercury is the youngest of the planets, or signifies the youngest people, and Saturn is the oldest, or signifies the oldest people. So they're both gender neutered or gender neutral or transgendered, but on different ends of the spectrum. Mercury is a planet which is too young for gender to really make that much of a difference, and Saturn is a planet which is too old for gender to really make that much of a difference. So Mercury signs are going to work with gender in the same way that a person who is just on the verge of approaching their pubescence would be doing. Where Saturn would be working with gender more in the way that a person who is approaching their menopause would be, looking at things. So to talk about this with a little more specificity, Gemini really is a mildly male sign, but it hasn't really fully entered manhood. So that means that Gemini is really remarkable for actually not taking anything particularly seriously. In other words, Gemini is not the place in the zodiac where we take risks or where we get involved with threats and dangers. It's quite the opposite from that. In Gemini, we don't find the energy to really commit ourselves to pursuing something with like a rigid passion. We get more like attracted to whatever pulls our attention at the moment. So it's more like a young boy who has plenty of energy, plenty of enthusiasm, plenty of ambition and zeal, but not a whole lot of focus or responsibility with it. And then you have Virgo, which is the same thing, but on the female side. But females are quite different than males. So the way it's going to work out for Virgo, it's like a young woman who's on the verge of puberty. It doesn't mean the same thing as Gemini. It means here you have a person who's thinking a lot about their future and the responsibilities that are coming in their future. And they try to become qualified and well prepared for the adulthood that they're entering into. And that's really the hallmark of Virgo, is this kind of preparedness and preparation and interest and prudence and caution and for thinking things. Now to talk a little bit about Saturn's two signs. First of all, Aquarius. Aquarius, okay, it's slightly male because its fundamental element is slightly male. It's air, but it's slightly male with a slightly female affect. In other words, like presentation. It presents in a slightly feminine way, although it's masculine. And the specific type of feminine presentation or affectation is going to be a type of femininity which is consonant with Saturn's very nature. So it's not going to be flowery or something like that. So this is why you have Aquarius well known for the feminine quality to sacrifice the self for the interest or the best interest or the sake of a partnership or a group. Capricorn is converse to this. Its element is earth, so its basic nature is slightly female, but it's female with a slightly male affectation or way of presenting itself. And again, that male quality is not going to be martial or solar. It's going to be more like Saturn's quality. So typically Capricorn is known as a sign which shows the masculine traits of being incisive or critical, and also being quite commanding and definite. Finally, we can try to describe the real jackpot here, the two most gender complex signs, which are Libra and Scorpio. Libra's element and mode are both male, but its ruler is Venus, very female. So Libra is fundamentally masculine, but it's going to present or affect or express itself via feminine assets, which are consistent with Venus's nature. So typically you find Libra presenting with the feminine ability to be artistic and expressive. It will have masculine nature to it, so it's going to have qualities of independence and so forth. But its affectation or way of expressing is going to be feminine in the sense of trying to come through beauty, trying to come through design, trying to come through appearance, trying to come through art. And finally, we want to talk a bit about Scorpio. Scorpio is the converse to Libra. So with Scorpio, the element and the mode are both female, very female, but the ruler is very, very male. So you really have like a quantum gender superposition here. What you can say to describe Scorpio's gender dynamic is that it's fundamentally feminine. So its concern is mostly on the way things are experienced, the way you feel about things. However, it's going to present itself definitely in a non-feminine way. It presents itself in a very strongly masculine way, even though it's actually very deeply feminine. What type of masculine way? Masculinity, which is most consonant with its ruler's nature. Its ruler loves freedom. Mars, its ruler loves independence and power and boldness. So you have a very feminine sign at its heart, presenting itself, expressing itself to the world through the masculine ability to be both forceful and bold and also independent and self-sufficient. It's actually a very difficult balance to maintain, but if maintained, is one of the most attractive and compelling recipes that you can taste. So this is an episode of a series called The Simple Beauty of Astrology. What is beauty? Beauty is balance and fine detail expressed in a clear and simple format. It's hard to imagine a description of the male-female gender dynamic that is more balanced and nuanced, yet expressed in a more delightfully, deceptively simple format. I hope this video helped you appreciate one of the many beautiful symmetrical aspects of the classical zodiac, and how it interacts so gracefully with other zodiacal facets to weave an incredibly rich symbolic lattice that is truly one of the greatest creative works of art humanity has ever conceived. If you like this video, you can use this playlist to watch all the videos in this series. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave some comments. Thank you so much.